Okay. So anyway, yeah. So I'm gonna try not to strain my voice too much today. Who's listening to music? Timmy, don't do that.
What?
Listen to music so loud that I can hear it at the front of the classroom.
Yeah, but you see, it can't even see the board.
Yeah. Also, don't you want to look forward?
Yeah, go back to your seat. I can't even see the board.
This is also going on YouTube,
Okay.
guys.
Yeah. Yeah, guys, you're gonna be internet famous.
This is
All
great.
700 of my subscribers are gonna have an opportunity to not watch this video. Okay. So guys, on Monday we talked about. Was it Monday or Tuesday? But anyway, a couple days ago, we talked about how the Mongols pulled off their conquest and looked at the life of Genghis Khan. Today we're going to be talking a little bit more about what made the Mongols so successful. Then we're going to be looking at the Mongol successor states, known as the Khanates, or sometimes the Hordes, which I love. And then we'll be looking very closely at two of the Khanates, the Golden Horde, which ruled over Russia, and the Il Khanate, which ruled over Persia, Mesopotamia, and parts of Central Asia. So ill. All right, could you go forward like 7? Nice. Yeah, so here are the four big divisions of the Mongol Empire. These start off as just internal like provinces, but then they split apart as each governor of each province doesn't have anybody else to fight except their like cousins that rule over other parts. All of the leaders of all these Khanates are descendants of Genghis Khan. And the very first war between Mongol provinces that we're going to see, which you could think of as a civil war, is a war between the Khanate of the Golden Horde and the Il Khanate that happens towards the end of the 1200s. So the Mongols function as a unified conquering force and empire for about 100 years, starting around 1200 with Genghis Khan's unification of the Mongols, and ending around 1300 with the war between the Khanate of the Golden Horde and the Il Khanate. Okay, but so can we go back 1? No, forward 2. There. No, back 1. There. Okay, so why were the Mongols so successful? Here are some theories put forward by military historians. What made the Mongols so successful? So first of all, the individual Mongol was an incredible soldier. The average soldier for an agrarian civilization was not very good. Maybe the top 10% of the warriors would be elite, noble warriors equipped with armor, horses, and a lifetime of training. But the vast majority of people that live in agrarian states are undernourished, poor farmers who spend most of their time farming, which means they neither have the equipment nor the time to become elite warriors. On the other hand, Mongols spend all of their time riding horses and a significant amount of their time hunting using the same bows that they would use in warfare. So the average Mongol is already a professional level rider and archer, and from there it's not too hard to give them a little bit of equipment and let them go do their thing. Also, the Mongols are very flexible. This is a strategy that they have in common with a lot of other very successful empires, and that is that they learn from the people they conquer. For example, Rome famously continually adopted new military equipment and tactics from the people they were going up against, which is how the Roman legions ended up being such a flexible and powerful military force. Same thing for the Mongols. When they go to China and they discover explosives and siege engineering and stuff like that, they bring those people with them. Third is the Mongols were able often enough to avoid having to fight at all. Their reputation was so fearsome that all they had to do was burn down a couple cities in whatever territory they were conquering, and all the other cities would just let them in. Because it's better to pay taxes than to have every single person in your city slaughtered or abducted, depending on their gender. Fourth, the Mongols created a very effective incentive structure. An incentive structure is just basically any organization will have a way of getting the people within the organization to do what they're supposed to do. So if you do a good job, you would have access to lots and lots of loot, booty, if you will. So if your unit features prominently in a battle and performs heroically, then you will get a big fat slice of loot. You know, gold and silver and cows and fine tables and women. Not necessarily in that order. On the other hand, if your unit retreated or behaved cowardice in some way that was cowardly or even perceived as cowardly, your entire unit could be killed. So the Mongol soldiers had a very strong incentive to demonstrate courage and ferocity in battle. Also, at least at first, the Mongols would make the tax rates for the surrendering cities pretty competitive. They'd be like, look, guys, just let us in. We'll just kill the head honcho. We'll put one of our boys in charge. We'll lower your taxes by 10%. We'll protect trade routes, and we all win. And a lot of people were like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do it. Now, what we'll see is later on the Mongols raise taxes significantly on large parts of the population. So this is kind of like a low entry rate. Credit cards do this all the time, as they say the first year is free, and then the next years it's like there's all these hidden fees you didn't know about. The Mongols invented that.
Capitalism.
Not quite capitalism. We'll talk about the invention of capitalism. You know who invents capitalism?
Monopoly.
The Dutch.
What? Same thing.
Yeah.
The tulips.
The Dutch. Well, the tulip craze was one of the first speculative bubbles, which we'll talk about. But speculative bubbles are when you start buying things just because everybody else thinks that they're going to be valuable, like Pokemon cards, or Bitcoin, or stocks. Anything that the value is going up just because everybody else thinks the value is going to go up and for no other reason, that's a speculative bubble. And capitalism makes this possible because it makes it really, really easy for anybody to buy anything they want. At least at first. Because you can get credit and buy things on credit. So you can take out a loan and then spend $100,000 on tulip bulbs because you know those tulip bulbs are going to be worth $150,000 later, right? Except not always. So anyway, we'll talk about that later. But it's not necessarily capitalism, but it is an intelligent tactic. Let us in, we'll lower your taxes for now, and otherwise we're going to murder you. So it's a pretty clear deal. It's like lower taxes or death. Okay, next slide, please. So what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be talking about the impact of the Mongols. And so there is a term that some historians use known as Pax Mongolica, which is a, well, do you guys know the term Pax Romana? What is that? Say it loud so YouTube can hear you. Oh yeah, what's up?
Pax Romana was basically the time where Rome was like peaceful and it just grew and grew instead of like conquering.
Yeah. And so within the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire was so militarily dominant, there was nobody else left to fight. So there just weren't wars in Europe for a while. And during this time, the economy and trade expanded because if you're less likely to get murdered, you're more likely to go on long trips to try and make money. The same thing happens with the Mongols. The Mongols, once they conquer all of this, basically enforce a gigantic free trade zone and murder any bandits that they can find. And they are a very effective anti-bandit force. You're not going to get away from the Mongols. So, what this does is this effectively links China, India, the Middle East, Russia, Western Europe, and North Africa together into a single giant trading bloc. This is going to have huge impacts both for the world economy and for global population because it's also going to make possible for the spread of pandemic diseases. Most importantly, the bubonic plague. some historians have talked about the Great Mongol Corporation. Basically, the Mongols ran their empire like a giant family business. Is the Khans, who had capitals in Mongolia, China, the Middle East, and southern Russia, basically just tried to increase tax revenue and increase their wealth by cooperating with each other. And they, for about 100 years, effectively worked together. And they almost farmed people the way they herded their cattle, as they would take interesting and useful groups of people and just pick them up and move them around. So for example, the Khan of China and the Khan of Persia, the Ilkhanate and the Yuan dynasty, once exchanged a couple hundred doctors from China for a couple hundred astronomers and mathematicians from the Ilkhanate. So people did not really have rights under the Mongol dynasty, but this mix of ideas and people and goods all over Eurasia was all done for the purpose of increasing Mongol wealth. But by increasing Mongol wealth, it also tended to increase the wealth of the entire territory. But so you can think of the Mongol dynasty as a 100-year-long, super successful business monopoly run by the descendants of Genghis Khan. Khan Incorporated. Conco. So also during this time period, this is the kind of last great peak of the Silk Road. Is the Silk Road was actually losing out in popularity to the Indian Sea trade route because water trade is way more efficient than land-based trade. But the Mongols are able to make overland trade super safe and pretty reliable. And so the Silk Road re-emerges as a major trade route during this time period. And it's going to have major effects on every single part of Eurasia, and is going to effectively bind Eurasia into a single economic unit. Okay, cool. Any thoughts or questions about that before we keep going? How many of you guys would have bought stock in Conco? I definitely would have, for sure. Unfortunately, it's a family-held stock. You couldn't buy away. Okay. Unless, maybe you could get your sister to marry one of them or something. Okay, next. This is the Mongol Passport. It was a big, heavy bronze seal that you had to have visible on you at all times if you were traveling. And it was about as big as a banana. The banana's there for scale. Yes?
Wasn't that the thing they always had to carry with them to show that they were allowed to trade or whatever?
Exactly, that's what I just said.
Oh.
Yeah, it's okay. Were you distracted by the banana?
Yep.
Yeah, that's okay. But so the inscription says, by the strength of eternal heaven and an edict of the Khan, he who has no respect shall be guilty. So basically you must let whoever has this pass, and you must not bother them, otherwise you will be guilty of impeding trade within the Mongol Empire. Yes? Wait, what?
How do you get the seal? Do you request one, or do you have to have something useful that you should trade in order to get one? How does it work?
I imagine how it works is you would have to go to some kind of the equivalent of a Mongol DMV to get your trading license and apply for it. It's possible also that you might have to purchase it. And so that would be a way of taxing trade, is in order to get the passport you'd have to pay a fee, and then you'd have free access to Mongol trade routes afterwards.
Is it just a one-time fee, or would it be multiple?
I'm not actually sure about the details of how this works. But by making these passports a thing, it simultaneously allowed them to tax trade, but then also to protect and regulate trade. Next. Okay, so another big impact of the Mongols is that by connecting China and the Middle East, they connected the two most scientifically advanced civilizations in the world to each other. So you remember all of the amazing scientific breakthroughs that we talked about with the Song Dynasty? And all of the amazing scientific breakthroughs we talked about with the Abbasid Caliphate? The Mongols are going to take both of those and mush them together. What were some of the big ones you remember from the Song Dynasty? Some of the big breakthroughs from the Song Dynasty.
Order.
A
What?
proper printing press.
The printing press,
Gunpowder.
gunpowder,
Improved iron production.
improved iron production,
Jump ships.
jump ships. Mongols aren't so stoked on boats. Clocks, magnetic compass, tea. I'm all about caffeine, guys. Caffeine is the foundation of modern civilization. Cora?
Were they the ones that made that really cool rice?
The
The
champa
champa
rice
rice?
was actually a strain of rice developed in Vietnam, but then China incorporated it into Chinese agriculture. Right, cool. And then so in the Abbasid Caliphate, you had alchemy, which resulted in, among other discoveries, sugar and coffee. Sugar and alcohol. They also developed coffee. They also developed algebra and the decimal system, although they mostly just stole that from India. They developed the concept of algorithms, and they made great advances in astronomy. So these two different, and surgery, by the way. And so these two different, very, very well-developed bodies of scientific knowledge just get transplanted. So the Mongols just import scientists and thinkers from the Middle East to China, and from China to the Middle East. Like, literally are just herding intellectuals back and forth. Like, let's see, I'll trade you 5 astronomers for 2 doctors. They're like, 3 wait. Okay, so anyway.
Did they just have these like just on standby?
I don't know
Like,
exactly.
they're like, all right,
But
I
yeah.
want to place an order for 2 doctors.
So the Mongols did not have a system of checks and balances in their government. The Khan could basically do whatever he wanted with any of the people in his society. So if the Khan needed a doctor to be abducted and exported to the Il Khanate, he could send a messenger to a doctor's house and be like, surprise, you're moving to Persia. And the doctor would be like, oh, okay. Hey, guess what, kids? we're moving to Persia. And the doctor would be like, no, I'm not paying for your kids to go. And the Khan would be like, I'm not paying for your kids to go. Just you. You can have new kids.
Buy new kids?
No, you don't buy your kids. You buy your wife.
Oh.
Why? Wait, seriously? You can buy a wife back then?
Yeah. Marriage in most societies in the Middle Ages was viewed more as a economic contract than any sort of like romantic relationship.
What the heck?
Yep. Sorry. Yes.
Did people have like harems of people, or like?
Yes. In
Yeah.
both the Middle East and in China, wealthy elites would have multiple wives and concubines.
Oh, that's kind of.
So, harems.
So are all the things on there things that they made when they were combined?
No, these are just things that are exchanged. So
okay.
Chinese and Arabic mathematics combined. So for example, the Chinese invented fractions, but India and the Middle East developed the decimal system. But as you guys know, fractions can be expressed as decimals, and decimals can be expressed as fractions. So you get both of those now. Or in science, China had made a lot of advances in metallurgy and medicine, like internal herbal medicine, whereas in the Middle East, they made a lot of advances in, like surgery and astronomy and stuff like that. And now they just get all of it. Could you click forward one? A printing technology from China spreads to the Middle East, and then also from the Middle East to Europe. And it's not a coincidence that only 100 years later, in the mid-1450s, that Johannes Gutenberg combines block printing technology with the Roman-style oil and wine press to create the first printing press, which is a mechanized, slightly more efficient version of what the Song Chinese were doing in the 1100s. Also, everybody gets gunpowder, and everybody's going to adopt gunpowder because it's awesome. But the Europeans especially, when they figure out how gunpowder works, are going to become obsessively focused on gunpowder. And even though the Europeans are basically the last people in Eurasia to hear about it, they are going to vault ahead of everybody else in terms of gunpowder technology, which is going to be important. Because even though Europe is behind in almost every other field of science, Europe is going to be the world leader in cannon and gunpowder production by 1500. Partially because Europe is so busy fighting wars with themselves. And because Europeans were obsessed with building castles during the Middle Ages. There's like a castle on every hilltop in Europe. So, and the best way to get rid of a castle is with gunpowder. You can blow them up with cannons, or even easier is you can just dig a hole under the castle and then put a couple barrels of gunpowder in the hole and then light the fuse and blow up a whole side of the castle. That's called undermining. Which meant that then what you got is you got battles underneath the castles in tunnels in like the total darkness where the miners would be digging down and then people in the castle would be mining down and trying to intersect the tunnels, and then they would fight in the tunnels for control of the tunnels. Which sounds like hell. Just fighting hand to hand with like picks and shovels in like wet tunnels next to barrels of gunpowder that might blow up at any moment. Oh my god. I'm so glad I didn't live back then. All right. Also, lots of food crops get exchanged. China gets a lot of nice fruits, including grapes. And a lot of spices get introduced to the Middle East for the first time. And also, tea drinking becomes an established tradition in the Middle East. And then last of all, everybody exchanges diseases. This is going to be a repeated pattern. Trade and contact between groups will simultaneously and always be a double-edged sword. The more contact you get between people, the more ideas, the more exchange, the more money to be made, but then also the more germs will be exchanged. So while you have a flourishing of culture and the economy, you also get the Black Death, which is literally the most deadly single event in human history. Right, cool. This is the spread of the Black Death. So yeah, this is a map of human population from 1 million years ago, which it basically stays around 0 for a long time. And then the only significant dip you see basically ever is the Black Death right here. And then it just explodes. Okay, next. So we're back to the Mongol Khanates. Let's look at 2 of the Khanates. We're first going to look at the Il Khanate. Go ahead. Keep going. Keep going.
Wait,
So, here we go. So the Il Khanate here started out as one of the provinces of the Mongol Empire. And it was the second most populous and richest after the Yuan dynasty, which was China. So this includes Anatolia, most of Mesopotamia, including Baghdad, Persia, and what is modern day Afghanistan, and I think this is Turkmenistan, or is that Uzbekistan? Turkmenistan.
Uzbekistan.
That's Uzbekistan? Okay, sorry. Yeah, well, so 2 of the 5 stands. Right, so now there's a serious tension here because the Abbasid Caliphate is a highly developed, highly literate and cultural society ruled by a Muslim leader known as the Caliph. Now, when the Mongols come in, they murder the Caliph in the most dishonorable way imaginable from a Muslim perspective. They roll him up in a carpet and trample him with the dirty hooves of their horses. The Mongols thought this was reasonably respectful because nobody got to see their blood. So this automatically gets the Muslim population of the Middle East not feeling great about their Mongol conquerors. And the Mongols do not convert to Islam at first. They remain shamanic, Tangrist people. So this is a huge problem for Muslims because one of the worst things that you can do, according to Islam, is worship idols. And the Mongols don't even worship idols. They worship like rocks and trees and stuff. And so this is really, really a blow to the Muslim subjects of the Ilkhanate, and they hate it. And this makes the Ilkhans super unpopular. So we're going to pause there, and then we're going to go. Well, let's move north to look at the Golden Horde. So scoot forward one. So this is the Golden Horde. The Ilkhanate is right here. So they border each other pretty much all the way along their northern border. And so the Khanate of the Golden Horde includes the Caucasus, southern Russia, and Ukraine. And then they indirectly rule over a bunch of Russians up here in the cold forests. This is a sort of independent rule, though. They basically just hang out down here because there's still nice grasslands here. And then they just make the poor peasants up here pay taxes to them. So anyway, the rulers of the Golden Horde actually do convert to Islam. The people that they conquer are like, hey, did you know that the whole universe is ruled by one single giant, all-powerful entity known as God? And they're like, you mean like a really big mountain? And they're like, no. Even bigger. But so the Khans and the elite Mongols convert to Islam, and then they look south and they realize that their cousins in the Ilkhanate are not converted to Islam. And applying the concept of Dar al-Islam, which is that it's okay to attack any lands ruled by non-Muslim rulers, they decide to attack the Ilkhanate and forcibly convert them to Islam, which they do, which leads to a civil war between the Ilkhanate and the Golden Horde in 1295, and basically represents the final fracturing of the Mongol family corporation into 4 smaller but still enormous corporations: the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, the Chagatai Khanate, and the Yuan dynasty, which we'll talk about tomorrow. So this results in a war between Mongols, which almost always happens. Anytime you have a totally dominant military force that conquers the entire known world, they conquer and conquer and conquer and conquer, and when there's nobody left to conquer, they split and fight each other. This happens with the Macedonians, where Alexander the Great conquers everything, and then his empire splits, and then they just fight each other. This happens in Rome, with the civil wars between Caesar and Pompey, and Octavius and Mark Antony. Yeah, you know, and the other 2 dudes who in the triumvirates, who don't worry about them. And this happens with the Mongols too. So the only way you can beat Mongols is to also be a Mongol. But so anyway, you get a massive war between the Golden Horde and the Ilkhanate, and the Golden Horde basically achieves its objective. It's not like they conquer the Ilkhanate, but they're able to fight hard enough that the Ilkhan is like, okay, you know what? I don't care. I'll be Muslim. No big deal. So he converts to Islam and resolves the conflict. Not only does that end the war, but that also makes it much easier for the Mongols to rule over the people of the Middle East because they're much more accepting of a Muslim ruler. So.
Wait, I thought you said that was like the final fracture thing. But if they just like made up.
Yeah, well, so they do. This is like the final fracture. And even though the Ilkhanate does convert to Islam, they don't go back to being part of a single political unit.
Oh,
They are going to be independent states from here on out. Okay, next slide. So, the Ilkhanate and the Golden Horde are not particularly effective administrators. The Mongols are very good at conquering, but they are not very good at actually ruling over cities. The Mongols view peasants like sheep. The Mongols believe that the peasants who eat grass, aka wheat, are closer to livestock than they are to themselves, to the Mongols. And so they view these populations of farmers basically as resources to be exploited and extracted. So the Mongols tend to adopt systems of super heavy taxation, Now remember, not at first, but once they've actually got everybody, then they're like, okay, and now give us half your stuff. And we'll be back next year also. They adopt a system known as tax farming, which is basically where individual private contractors buy the rights to tax a population. This is very easy for a government to do because you just sit in your palace and warlords essentially approach you and say, I will give you $10 million right now in cash for the right to extract taxes from the city of Baghdad. And the Ilkhan will be like, 11 million. And then the guy will be like, all right, 11, done. And then, once you've paid for the right to tax Baghdad, you go and tax Baghdad as hard as you possibly can, exploiting every single law and every single loophole to get as much money out of Baghdad as possible. Because you need to get at least $11 million out of Baghdad, or whatever currency they use there. So you just squeeze Baghdad as hard as you can, and if you can squeeze out more than 11 million, you get to keep it as profit. So it's basically allowing tax collection to be run by private corporations, which sounds like a scary thing to me. So that is how the Ilkhanate raises its money. This is super, super unpopular. And the taxation levels reach such a high point that it begins to shut down trade in the Ilkhanate. Taxes are so high that it's no longer profitable for individual companies to even engage in business. Sorry about your hand.
It's okay.
So much of the money is actually being sucked up out of the economy and just hoarded by the horde that it's becoming hard to engage in trade, and paper money is not effective. They do know about paper money now because they're connected up with China, but they don't understand how inflation works. So paper money basically becomes worthless as soon as they print it. So what this means is that the Ilkhanate and the Golden Horde, which suffers from similar problems, is going to decline quite rapidly. And eventually there's going to be local uprisings within the Ilkhanate that's ultimately going to result in the reemergence of independent states. In Anatolia, you're going to see the rise of a Turkish group known as the Ottomans. They're going to be super important. In Persia, you're going to see the rise of a Neo-Persian, Neo-Persian state that's going to emerge. And these guys, the Neo-Persians and the Ottomans, are going to emerge as the major rivals once the Mongols disappear. And in Russia, the Dukes of Muscovy, aka Moscow, are going to emerge as the dominant rulers, and they're going to push the Mongols out. So the Mongols are basically going to overexploit the people they conquer to the point where they get so upset that they rebel against the Mongol rulers and eventually kick them out. This is one example of a Mongol Khan in the Ilkhanate wearing Middle Eastern style armor. All right. Next slide, Tim. One last slide.
What?
Oh, Mohammed.
Oh, sorry, Tim. Sorry. Yeah, I know.
Okay.
The wires get crossed in my brain sometimes. It just happens. There's so many wires crammed in here. All right, so anyway, this might not look very advanced as far as anatomy charts go, but look, they figured some stuff out. They figured out that there's a tube inside of a person that goes in a real squiggly line from your mouth to your butt. So that's something. But they made a lot of advances in the Ilkhanate. Advances in astronomy and calendar making, including a very accurate astronomical model that allowed for the accurate prediction of eclipses, even decades or hundreds of years in advance. This was a geocentric model based partially off of ancient Roman ideas, but also using ideas from China. In mathematics, they combined the decimal system and fractions together and figured out how you can convert back and forth between the two, which is cool. They also continued working on pi and were able to calculate the most precise version of pi yet developed. And a lot of these ideas that were developed by the Ilkhanate were passed on to Western Europe, especially Italy, because Italy was continuing to trade with the Ilkhanate while they were in power. So yeah, those are just some specific examples of advances of science and math. Not as amazing and groundbreaking as the Abbasid Caliphate, but this is more of a period of synthesis. They're taking what the Abbasids figured out, and they're taking what the Song dynasty figured out and combining it together. Okay, so I think that is all for today. We have 2 minutes left. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions?
We have 10 minutes.
Oh, we have 12 minutes left?
12 minutes.
Oh my gosh. Wow, I'm sorry. Let me take a moment, and then we're going to talk about Russia. Everybody take a minute and stretch your hands.
I'm still writing.
You don't have to write down every word on the slide.
We do.
Okay, that's fine. Are you drawing a copy of the mouth-butt tube? If you want to be less crass, you could call it the alimentary canal.
I'm gonna look at this later and have no idea what it is.
I kind of feel bad for the rulers of the Ilkhanate, because you know their granddad got to ride around and conquer everything, and they just get settled, and they got to rule
Can you
over
just scroll down a bit?
dirty cities. No, I can't.
Huh?
It's fine.
So advances in science and astronomy and whatever spread to Europe
What's the last thing?
and have a significant effect on Europe. Mm-mm-mm.
I'm on the adapted Indian.
Oh my gosh.
It's beautiful.
Oh, no, where's the body?
Yeah, where's the body?
Where's the body?
That's
It's
the main
slow.
part. How do you know what that is then?
I won't. I'll forget what it is, but it's okay.
What
It's
is the label?
Yeah, like,
tube that runs off the butt.
Mine has decreased.
Yeah, label it.
Oh, I just noticed that picture.
Significant. Oh, that one, yeah.
typing.
3 pages.
Mr. Guilford, look, I drew it. It looks really good.
You said not right.
I processed better than it.
Let's just can't let go.
Wait, Mr. Griffith.
Yes.
So, during like the letter that you said, like last time, right? Was that like the time when they converted to Islam?
No, that was before.
Okay.
I'm trying to make it messy because I
The
don't want
last
to
line
redo
says the
everything.
development of your
Can we proceed?
science. Yeah.
Rhea, are you done?
No.
All right, I'm going to proceed anyway, Rita.
You can proceed, it's fine.
Okay, cool.
How did
Let's go.
Muslims get up there though?
What's up?
How did Muslims get up into the Golden Horde?
Oh, go back. Go back one more. Yeah, so Islam was already prominent in these regions. And so when they conquered here, they were ruling over a territory that was partially nomadic Muslim people. Sometimes some folks down here are known as Cossacks, and then other folks over here were like Turkic, related to the Turks. And then there were Christians living up in the forest regions up here.
Okay.
And so when the Mongols took over, they had no interest in converting to Christianity, but they were interested in the Islamic ideas of the nomadic Turkic peoples there. Good question. Okay, so let's proceed. So we're going to talk about Russia now. So guys, I love Russian history. I love every part of Russian history because it is completely epic and super brutal. Russian history is like death metal. It's just full volume. Yeah. So Russia was founded by Viking slave lords who carried their boats from one river to a different river and then were managed to sail somehow from Sweden to Turkey through Europe.
Wait.
And as they went, they slaved along the way, capturing the scattered farming peoples who lived in Eastern Europe. And they named those people Slavs, which is the Norse word for slave.
Oh.
That is where the word Slav comes from and where the Slavic language group comes from. So Russia was founded by Viking slave kings. They founded cities along the rivers, and they turned these cities into forts, and from those forts they would launch slave raids in the countryside, and they would drag people back kicking and screaming to their boats, and then they would take them down the river and then sell them in Constantinople when it was ruled by the Byzantines, and also to the Abbasid Caliphate. And Slavic slaves were highly prized as both warriors and as concubines. So, after being founded by Viking slave lords, there's then a war between Viking slave lords and the Mongols. And the Mongols conquer the Viking slave lords. I cannot think of a more epic combination or more evil combination than those two. So, during the period between the Mongol conquest and the rise of Moscow as an independent state, you see a fusion of local Russian Slavic slave lord culture and Mongol culture, including the Mongol tradition of absolute political authority. Whatever the ruler says happens. And you're going to see that as a continuity throughout Russian history all the way up until today. I had a Russian history teacher that said that Russia will never be a democracy, that Russia has been an autocracy since the Mongols took it over. The Khan's will was law. Then the Tsar, the ruler of Moscow, his will was law. Stalin, his rule, his will was law. Now Vladimir Putin, don't defy him or he will judo throw you through a wall. All right, so let's get started. So, what happens in Russia? So, in Russia, there were some advantages to being ruled by the Mongols. The cities actually developed a flourishing trade. Please don't write all this down.
Watch me.
Let me here, write down what I say. Write down what I say. Are you ready? Listen to what I say. Don't look at the slide. I'm turning the slide off.
No! Please!
No, guys, I promise you, just obsessively writing down word for word what is on the slide is not the best way to take
Well,
notes.
it still helps.
I will put the slides online.
But that means we have to take notes later on.
No, because what is, all right, pause. We will continue the lecture later. Let's talk about note-taking strategy. I promise I'm not going to skip Russia. I love Russia.
I want Russia.
Okay. Let's just talk about it though. What is the point of writing the slides down word for word?
You can have it word for word.
But what if I give you the slides?
No.
Yeah, I'll still write it down.
But
We
you,
need it to write it down because it helps us process it while we're writing.
True.
right. But so, I agree with that part. But, wait, Rhea, are you still just compulsively writing the slides?
I'm gonna hit sentence.
Please stop and listen for a second. No. Laura, give her phone back.
Stop.
YouTube, this is what it's like to be a high school teacher. It's great. I really do love it. But so, I agree that the main point of note-taking is to process the ideas. And when you're taking notes, that's you're processing the ideas not just auditorily. You're not just hearing me say the ideas, but you're also processing the ideas visually by reading the slide. And then you're also processing it kinesthetically. the words are coming out of your hand. But I would argue that it's actually more effective to take the ideas that I'm expressing orally and visually, process them, and then try to compress them into your own words. And what's going on there is that processing and that thinking about what the words are actually saying and then putting it into your own words will result in better retention of the main ideas.
Hey, can you like pause every once in a while and let us do that? Because
Oh.
like it goes really fast.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm sorry if I was going too fast. We can totally do that. I can also, so what I did today before this presentation is I went through and I made every single bullet point shorter, but I think I still need to make it even shorter. Don't I?
No.
Yes.
No?
I mean,
Maybe. Okay.
Right.
No.
Okay. Yeah, well, I will try to slow down. That way you can keep up. How many of you guys, okay, let's talk about it. So, how many of you guys felt like that was too fast? That's really important to get feedback. Cool. How many of you guys were not stressed during that lecture? Mohammed, were you even taking notes?
No, I was just listening.
Okay.
I took
Cool.
some notes.
So maybe here's what we should do is when we keep going with this lecture, which maybe we'll just finish this lecture tomorrow and introduce the DBQ next week. When we okay, cool. So done. Tomorrow will be Russia.
Yeah.
But so I'll try and take out even more words from the slide. And what I want you guys to do is I want you just to look at the slide and listen and think about what I'm saying. And then I'll give you guys a little bit of time after each slide to write down the main ideas. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Cool. This is skill building, guys. This is what we're doing. All right. Cool.
Can
Tomorrow's
you store this
Mongol
for me?
Russia.
No, just put it in your backpack. You have a folder.
Bye.
I don't want to open my backpack. So much work.
So you have a pencil?
Yeah.
Why do you
like
highlight